Did you miss me?
I did a lot. A lot.
I really don't want to get your channel deleted, Reed. You're asking for serious trouble if I answer that question.
Well, then stop fucking talking about us, man.
How much perceived value do you think we will lose?
Well, I mean, we lose a lot.
The establishment Republicans are not Republican in name only. That's what the GOP is.
So many people want everyone else to come to libertarianism the same way they did.
Right. The slave mentality is praised.
All right, thanks,
I want your phone to blow up with notifications every time the show is on. Thank you, Reed.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for watching another episode of The Naturalist Capitalist. I'm coming to you at a weird hour today, but I'm using my lunch break to connect with Austin Petersen. He was the runner-up for nominee of the Libertarian Party for president in 2016. Then he ran for Senate in Missouri. He's got an interesting backstory. Glad to have him on. How you doing, Austin?
Hey, Reed. Thanks for having me on, man. I should be asking you how you're doing because I've been watching your Twitter account the last week or so, and you seem frustrated.
I am, and I want to talk to you.
I feel like, you know, people are acting like maybe you've had a little bit too much to think lately and that maybe Reed Coverdale needs to be corrected.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I can sympathize with you a little bit now because I got to be honest, like last year, I was actually kind of angry at you when you endorsed Trump and, you know, when you left the Libertarian Party a few years ago, but I'm still in the Libertarian Party, and I'm not going to the GOP, but I do understand some of the shit that you went through. I mean, you think of libertarians as independent thinkers who want free discourse of ideas, but there are some off-limits areas you cannot touch, and then if you don't go along with the status quo, you get hung just the same way you would in the Democrat or Republican Party. So why don't you give us a little bit of the experience you had with that over the last few years?
I mean, you're talking about sacred cows, my man. You're talking about golden idols here. And the people demand the golden idols. They want the calf. They need to worship at the steps of a temple. And the libertarians are no different than any other group of people that gather together to share ideas of a similar bent, of a similar nature. Libertarian has their golden idols. And I mean, I kind of like thought of myself as a libertarian because I was like in the business of melting down those golden statues, right? Of kind of like, if you consider yourself a revolutionary, well, if the revolution is not revolutionizing, then it needs to be revolutionized, right? And so what I found is that there are these ideas and concepts and people, especially, that are off limits from criticism. People who are untouchable from an eye from a jaundiced eye, and you know, this is, you know, we have a priesthood in a sense, right? And we have an infallible pope. Even I would venture that we have someone in the libertarian movement that, you know, yes, people do criticize them, but it very much is like walking into Catholics, you know, a Catholic church and saying that, you know, the pope is the Antichrist or something. You know, you could, if you dare question, right? So. You know, you lose friends if you don't, you know, get together and, you know, with people when they on the issues that's required. And yeah, libertarians agree on a lot, but we disagree even on a lot more. And I guess I kind of like to poke and prod a little bit at the arrogance of intellectual schools of thought within the libertarian community. That and you know, me posting yesterday, I thought minarchism was the most superior school of libertarian thought, was to spark the discussion because too many people have a sort of, I think, a superiority complex. And you know, it's because I get older and I'm a little bit more bah humbug, but I feel like a little bit more humility might do us good when, you know, in reality, the American people have had a choice to choose our candidates and to choose to vote for people like ourselves, and they haven't. And maybe after a while, you have to start to say, maybe they're not all idiots. Maybe it's me. But then when you do that, of course, you make enemies. You make enemies when you shoot inside the tent, right? That happens in any other party. But if you're going to have to deal with those kinds of dynamics, if the backstabbing and the treachery and the lying and the certainly the sacrifice of principle, which goes on quite frequently, Bill Weld, and it was a perfect example. Why would you sacrifice your principles for the Libertarian Party? It's kind of strange because it's like, people are like, oh, well, we have to make compromises. And I'm like, you want us to make compromise for Bill Weld? Okay, well, I guess, some people have standards and, some are lower than others. And I even kind of joke about, maybe libertarians need to lower their standards. Sometimes I think of libertarians as kind of like the nerdy guy who thinks he needs to get the hot girl, right? And then it's kind of like, dude, maybe you should, I don't know, take a shower first, like, go do some push-ups and things like that. Like, we all want to punch above our weight. Absolutely. But like self-reflection and self-examination, like when I think about what it means to be a man is like, what makes you attractive to other people as a man is when you make yourself fantastic. You have to be amazing. You have to make yourself a product that is worthy of people wanting to buy it. So we keep putting ourselves up for sale and nobody's buying. So, changing the way you view things has to happen before you can then embark on a journey of changing your behavior so that you can ultimately change your outcomes, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah, something that I've enjoyed following you over the last couple of years is you seem to be one of the libertarians that everybody loves to hate, but you also are one of the guys that loves to be hated. So,
I've seen, it's like when I said about the heroin to 5-year-olds. What's that Rick and Morty quote? It's like, you don't boo me. I don't care what you boo me. I've seen what makes you cheer, right? So, you to on a certain level, it's like a heel, kind of like the world. If we're talking about professional wrestling, right? Play the heel, right? And those are important characters. Without the heel, you don't have the comedy, you don't have the fun, you don't have, the enjoyment of like what you get with a professional wrestling match, right? But the problem is that all of our wrestling superstars are like John Cena. Yeah, they look good and they look like golden boys, but like secretly they're taking money from China.
Yeah. Oh, that's true. I mean, has that been an evolutionary process for you from going to just being someone who said some unpopular things to now being the guy who kind of just boldly sticks the stick in the hornet's head?
I'll tell you, it's funny. Julie Borowski, I don't know if you know who she is. She's kind of a libertarian actress. Her and I kind of came up together in the movement in a certain way. We worked at Freedom Works together, different things. And there was always in DC and amongst libertarian organizations and groups of people, and conservative orgs and things like that, the grift. But I didn't know that it was what the grift was until I kind of got to DC. Right, I had my first job in politics in 2008. But it wasn't like immediately once you enter Washington, D.C., like the grift is on. Like anybody who's in the libertarian movement, like, yeah, there are some, absolute sincere freedom fighters and patriots. But, you can kind of count them on, maybe two hands at this point in time. But, our numbers have significantly dwindled in recent years. But, the grift is on, and it's kind of like, you observe up close and personal. I remember Julie Borowski and I like seeing stuff going down and just being like, this is pretty wild. I mean, we saw an armed coup take over the nonprofit org we were working at the time. I mean, unbelievable amounts of violence in Washington, D.C. with protests and different things like that you see up close. I even did television appearances on Russia Today for a little while, and you learn about like, how these Americans are being paid for by the Kremlin. Essentially, there's Putin's stooges, and they're here to undermine the United States with foreign propaganda. One of the things that bothered me the most deeply was that I saw so many libertarians, because anti-American propaganda sounds like libertarian propaganda to some people. A lot of times what bothered me was that people would take especially libertarians of a certain bent, would take propaganda that's obvious foreign disinformation and then spread it as if it were, God's honest truth, because it fit their narrative, right? And everybody's confirming their biases and everybody's kind of like trying to defend their narrative. So it kind of like, and there's the celebritarianism and all that kind of stuff, which could be in the same vein as grifting. But yeah, my thing that really I hate is like, I was thinking about this on my way here. There are so many conservatives and probably libertarians that are vaccinated that just lie to their followers that they're not vaccinated, or they will talk smack on vaccines and then they'll never say that they're actually vaccinated. And because it's like, you admit that if you admit you do it, then you're, a weenie. But that's the grift, right? It's popular for our people to be saying this. So I'm going to feed content into the aggregators that's going to pump out cash and followers on the other end so that I can be a internet celebrity and make cash and do all that kind of stuff, rather than kind of like sincere philosopher kings, or I won't say philosopher kings because I want to think of myself as this and I'll think of myself as a king, but like a philosopher warrior, right? Who are our philosopher warriors that are still out there, keeping the torch held high, fighting for freedom, who are real sincere believers in economic freedom, personal liberty. I mean, it's like if we had to have a gladiatorial tournament, there wouldn't be that many people there. But if the people who would be there, we all know who they are, we all know what they're going to say. You put them in the ring, they have the same tired argument, and we go back home, and some gold and some Bitcoin was exchanged hands. So we kind of have to rethink. We have to be a little bit more ponderous and be willing to play devil's advocate with ourselves and to question our most deeply held beliefs, because that's the only way that evolution can kind of come in and take its course, is if we, I think we stimulate it with, new generations of thought and new ideas. Because, I don't think that there's been a Bible. I don't think there's been a Christ savior of libertarianism yet. I don't know that there has been a Messiah. If there was, I missed it. Or, it's, we may have our mythology, but I think some of the best books on libertarianism probably haven't even been written yet. And certainly, while we may have some good freedom, I think we do have some good freedom fighters out there. Again, it's getting harder and harder to tell the good guys from the bad guys.
Yeah, I think something that a lot of people are missing these days is in libertarian circles, it takes zero courage to say whatever's, liberty popular. I mean, it doesn't take any courage at all, because you're not worried about what the mainstream media is going to say about you. You're not worried about what the status quo society is going to say about you, because you're in that liberty space. So what actually takes courage, it's telling libertarians that they're wrong about something, or that they're not adhering to their principles, or that they're shaky on something. That's what actually takes guts. And that requires being somebody who actually has a philosophy and actually stands on something and isn't just a contrarian against what, the mainstream bullshit narrative is. And you're seeing that a lot with things like property rights right now. Like you said, with vaccination, I'm personally not vaccinated. You are, but you're right. Like, it's become a cultural issue that you're like seeding your libertarianism if you decide to get the jab and then you admit it. Yeah, it really is weird how, people are starting to trash. They're starting to trash libertarians with principles just because it's not what's popular. And, that's kind of why I'm not a Republican or a Democrat or a mainstream normie, because that's what they do. They throw their principles out the window as soon as things get tough and squash opposition. It's kind of disappointing to see libertarians do that too. I mean, disagreement's fine, but if you take certain disagreements, you are like excommunicated from the community at this point.
And I've had these kinds of like purges. I've gone through this several times. I remember one significant purge that occurred was when I dared to question Ron Paul's rhetoric regarding the conflict that emerged between Russia and Ukraine. This would have been like 2013. And my critique which was taken out of context by his people. You can still read the piece on his website, and they just bash the crap out of me, right? Whatever Ron Paul's Foreign Policy Institute is. My critique was with how the rhetoric sounded as it made it easy for neocons or even the American people to make it sound as if we libertarians hate America or side with Russia, right? When in reality, Russia doing a foreign intervention into Ukraine is just as bad an example of interventionism as when American intervention occurs, right? But the way that it had been worded specifically seemed to, although I did not believe that it did, appeared to sound as if it was throwing up chaff for Putin. And so that was taken out of context and mischaracterized immediately, and people threw me under the bus, and where it's like, oh, this guy's the worst, he's the worst, right? But that's, again, because that's our Pope, right? You're talking about the Pope. If you say anything about the Pope at the Catholic Church, you're going to make people are just going to not be your friend. That's what it is. And after that, I kind of just accepted that. But then, we are rife as libertarians with paranoia. And some would say rightfully so. I would say to a degree, rightfully so. Warrantless mass surveillance, social media censorship, you name it. But there's a healthy level of paranoia and there's an unhealthy level of paranoia. And what an unhealthy level of paranoia will do is it will cause you to engage in logical fallacies that will have you seeing the equivalent of seeing shadows on the wall, where you are reflexively anti-something because an entity that you've identified as an enemy of the public good, it may not be, rightfully so or wrongfully so, an enemy that you have decided is an enemy of the public good or the enemy of liberty, what have you, then anything that comes out of that has to be questioned. Yes, fine. We're talking about Ambassador John Bolton here. Sure, right? But you can't write off those people's opinions who have that experience. You have to hear something first before you reject it, right? And you have to, and it's the mark of an educated mind is to be able to consider a thought without accepting it, right? And so what happens is that this automatic blanket rejection of ideas happens, right? When new ideas come in, right? Criticisms people can't take, they're blocked out, right? And we're resistant and hesitant to believe that our golden idols, our sacred calves, the non-aggression principle, could have some holes in them. Like we can't accept that our theories might need updating. And so therefore, like that change can't happen. And we become more of that cultish kind of a mindset. And you know what cults have? Conspiracy theories. And those conspiracy theories I've read are very important to cults, because a conspiracy theory is something that builds cohesion within a cult. And a conspiracy theory will keep a cult together, because a cult will be able to say, hey, we all have a common enemy. This enemy is the vaccine or Anthony Fauci or John Bolton or George Bush or whatever. These are our enemies. These are the icons of the cult. Don't tread on me. Here's your Logan. Here's your swag. Don't tread on me flag. Buy your My Pillow from the My Pillow guy, Mike Lindell, on the way out the door, right? Whatever. But it all operates in a similar function to how cults work. And you don't want to be a cult. And being a free thinker requires one to act in an individualistic manner. Now, if you're talking about winning elections or being a part of a political party, that's a collectivist act, right? But when you're talking, you have to have some kind of party cohesion, and you have to keep your mouth shut sometimes in order to be disciplined. And I believe in that. Right. And as somebody who's engaged in party politics, I think that's important sometimes democratically to get things done. But as a movement in general, we squash our free thinkers and kind of put people in boxes and put people away. And with the sort of the rise of the Zoomers and the internet millennials, the biggest shame that I feel is that we have lost so many young people to authoritarian ideologies because of the cravenness and the cultishness and incoherence of libertarian ideas. We prided ourselves on this consistency that turned out to be ephemeral. It wasn't true. There was always this inconsistency, and that hypocrisy, I think, alienated us to younger generations who may have voted for us or have become libertarians themselves.
Yeah, I mean, when you have a blanket rejection of things that you have deemed as undesirable or your enemy, then you have become what you set out to destroy. It's that whole, like, that red pill, blue pill thing. I mean, you've almost become blue pilled because you just automatically reject everything without thinking about it at all. You just take it at face value and accept that it's wrong, which is no different than accepting that something is true that, you know, some source is putting out. If you just automatically have a reaction, then you're not a critical thinker at all. You are just as mindless a drone as anyone who's just accepting that as biblical, whether it's coming from Anthony Fauci or the mainstream media. If you're not willing to look into it and say why you think it's true or not, then you aren't any different. We got a super chat here. It's from Justin O'Donnell. He says, God, I used to be on the Prague team that always attacked Austin. I've grown. Mark Pellegrino said to say hi to him when we talked last week.
Oh, that's good to see you, Justin. Thanks so much for joining us on the stream, and appreciate you donating to this good cause. I'm a big fan of Reed Coverdale. Reed, what's funny is that, you know, you're getting into the movement at a bad time. the Ron Paul years were great, but you know, you're asking questions, difficult questions, a little bit too early on, and what I don't want to see happen is that good guys like yourself get burned out, right? And I want to help be a better kind of beacon of hope. I don't want to be a cynical. I don't want to be Luke Skywalker from the stupid Star Wars movies that were made by the chicks. What were they called? I don't know. Where it was like drinking. I don't want to be the guy out here on the farm drinking the blue cow milk, and you know. I don't want to be that. I want to be Luke Skywalker from the alternative history from the books, leading the Jedi Temple, right? I want to train up the next generation of Jedi to go out and I still believe that liberty can one day be won, even in our lifetimes. And, you know, there's a plaque out front of my house here. It says liberty by sunset, because that was kind of one of my themes, is that I was tired of this whole concept of liberty in our lifetime that so many of my libertarian friends were saying. It's like, can we speed up the timeline just a little bit? How about but liberty by sunset? Like, let's storm the barricades now. Like, where are my revolutionaries at here? But you know, again, the movement's a little bit more tepid now. But maybe, you know, I hope that with me poking and prodding people a little bit, that perhaps I can percolate something a bit, right? Just like boiling, right? Just, you know, it's like, you know, getting some heat going, right? So a little bit of heat, a little bit of action, a little bit of fires under people's butts, make some people uncomfortable so they start humping and jumping and hopping and popping, and then, you know, it's time for us to get out there and to, you know, send out the skirmishers before the battle begins. I don't know where the next battle is, but I know what the war is, and the war is happening right now, and too many libertarians, I think, are like, you know, too inwardly focused. When I see, like you said, people who post things that everybody agrees with, it's so easy and it's so cheesy. And you're watching people just posting the same crap over and over again. It's like, you know that you're going to see what you saw here on this one page over there, because it's all content farms and bullshit and fake avatars, and nobody's real or being who they really are, at least. And the people that you do know that are like, as soon as the camera turns off, or somebody completely different. It's just phony. Phony's a $3 bill. A lot of what we see nowadays. But, you know, it's also because being a warrior for this cause doesn't really, you know, doesn't pay when you, not in a financial sense, that's one way, but also just, you know, when you go out there and you do put yourself out there on the line, people don't appreciate it. As a matter of fact, and, you know, what's that Taylor Swift quote? People throw rocks at things that are shiny. That's like anything. But the fact is that with libertarians, like, you know, our movement is not very holistic, and right now we don't have that sort of self-reinforcing system of favors that's passed around in movements. And I'll finish on that thought by saying that Morton Blackwell, who's the head of the American Conservative Union, wrote this awesome Laws of the Public Policy Process. It talked about healthy reciprocal favors that are done by movement and how you don't keep score. You just, everybody helps each other and does reciprocal things. There's a little bit of that goes around, but not as much as there used to be. And we probably need to find ways to like heal wounds and rifts and the way to do that is to probably just help each other out with things, go on each other's podcasts and things.
Yeah. So speaking of, prodding at things and like getting people to think, you had a pretty hot take yesterday on Twitter. And I personally remember last year when you did I think I watched your live stream live when you said you were going to vote for Trump instead of Joe Jorgensen. And it was because the Libertarian Party wasn't taking a hardline stance against all the tyranny that was taking place around the country. I think a lot of people forget that. But yesterday you were talking about how doctors should have the right to refuse service to people who don't take the vaccine. But I wanted to let you just explain what you meant in totality. Yeah. What did that mean?
So I kind of in a sideways way compared it to the Obamacare fight when we were talking about the individual mandate for Obamacare. And in that fight, what we were discussing was whether or not insurance companies should be required to cover individuals who had some form of a pre-existing condition, right? And every libertarian that I know of, I mean, that to me is kind of a litmus test. Every libertarian that I know of opposed the individual mandate of Obamacare. And that was for what reasons? I mean, if you were to sit down and list all the reasons why you were against that mandate, I would think that you would not draw a distinction necessarily, although you could, between doctors wishing to refuse service, between doctors and then also insurance companies who don't wish to, offer a service to a potential customer if they so desire. But people have this kind of different view of doctors, and that's fine. They see doctors as it's different from insurance companies. Doctors should do no harm. That's fine. There was a lot of, I think, people misunderstand what the Hippocratic Oath is and how it's been used and what it means. Because people just kind of use that. People were quoting they were saying Hippocratic Oath like it was a law, right? And it's like, okay, well that's it's definitely not a law. But I believe physicians own their lives and bodies and do as they please, provided they harm no one else. But what was telling to me was where I felt like I had gone into a black hole and come out the other side in a new dimension, was that there were the anti-vaccine mandate people who were protesting, and some of them may have been anti-vaxxers, some of them may have been people like me who were just protesting the mandate and whatever, they were vaccinated, what have you. But there was a lady who was screaming at these protesters, ostensibly conservatives and libertarian protesters. She's yelling at her car. You may have seen this video, maybe on Libs of TikTok, where she's like, if you get sick, don't come to the hospital. If you get sick, don't come to the hospital. And I was kind of like, Eureka, here is a liberal, ostensibly, again, liberal Democrat, who doesn't believe in universal health care. and I go, bazinga, this is a moment, because I could bet you that simply because of how infuriated the crowd would have been at her, I wanted to applaud. Simply because, not because I think it's nice to refuse people at the hospital, but because of the principle of the matter. But sadly, conservatives and libertarians, which was the most disgusting display of the outrage displayed yesterday, libertarians were arguing that doctors should be required to treat patients, of which they disagree. Everyone should be treated equally. I saw from some bitch online who was posting this saying that, everyone should be treated equally, who markets herself as this libertarian girl. I'm just another cute libertarian girl. Look at my boobies. I like liberty and drink colloidal silver, and vaccines are the Antichrist. It's kind of like, I have to take these people seriously because people listen to them and take them seriously. But that doesn't mean that I can't poke or prod or make fun. That's a little jab joke for you. But yeah, because you know why? Because people don't have a sense of humor when whatever it is their gree-gree, right? Whatever it is their kind of woo-woo. Whatever anybody is their golden calf, right? The anti-vaxxers, their golden calf is stopping and blocking the vaccines. Every single thing that comes out, we got to stop it. If it's good news, I ignore it. If it's bad news, it's the front page, right? And like, you know, I almost made a joke. I saw the lady who was on the Veritas video with James O'Keefe, and it's like this nurse lady who was like complaining and saying, you know, ostensibly myocarditis was tied to the vaccine and stuff. So I was watching it, and they like posted like it was awesome that she, like, this nurse had raised $153,000 in 2 days. And I'm kind of like, okay, but I mean, like, weren't we just like saying big pharma shill money, grifter, you know, cash flowing in? Like, you know, you can't say that I'm a bought and paid for shill of Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, and then I can't turn around and say, well, you're just a paid shill from big conspiracy. Because, I mean, there's a lot of money in lying to people about politics and medicine and pharmacies. Because there's, you know, it's like, this is a funny story. So on 9/11, one of the things I like to do is to say to people, happy 9/11, and see how they respond. Because there are a lot of people who make a lot of money on 9/11.
Yep.
I'm not talking about first responder. If you said that to a first responder or if you said it to a firefighter or a police officer or like a soldier or something like that, or somebody who was in New York or whatever, if you said happy 9/11 to them, they would recoil. They would rightly, but there's a certain class of people read, or a group of people, that if you say happy on 9/11, if you say happy 9/11 to them, they'll go, happy 9/11, because they make a lot of money on 9/11. They sell T-shirts, they sell little glass, you know, twin towers, things and stuff like that. So for them, 9/11 is a great day, you know. So grifters. Are there anti-vax grifters in our movement? Yes, a lot of them. And they make a lot of money spreading lies and disinformation, and they are full of logical fallacies. And their sacred cow, their golden idol, is the vaccine. So, to tie this all up, when I made my hot take, it was a hot take because the assumption was that the vaccine was effective, right? By saying that the doctor should be able to refuse treatment, that should be a blanket statement, meaning that it doesn't matter what it's for. I even later said that if a doctor doesn't want to treat someone who got a vaccine and had myocarditis as a result of it, that should be their right. And the anti-vaxxers are like, yeah. But then when I finished it by saying, and if they don't want to treat an anti-vaxxer who had COVID, they should have the right to refuse, then they were like, oh, this doesn't go in my programming, right? So it's like they're programmed. These are people who, like, they make memes about thinking for themselves, and they are NPC. They'll make an NPC meme, but they are NPCs. They may be in on the joke, but that doesn't mean that they can't be the joke themselves. Just because you get the joke doesn't mean that everybody's still not laughing at you. You may think you're funny, but maybe everybody thinks you're really the clown, you know? So maybe you're the clown, but nobody can see that because, you know, we all, of course, have our inner eye looking outward, and looking inward is difficult. And especially if you look inward and there's an ugly, disgusting creature in there and you see it, nobody wants to recognize that. Certainly nobody wants to purge from themselves, you know, the evil of you know, having spent what? How many years of your life would you have spent believing in nonsense, right? And how many years have wasted? People can't accept that, right? They'd rather die than think that, you know, Oswald was the lone gunman that killed JFK, because they love JFK. But, you know, JFK was a shitty president, just like most of them, and Oswald was the lone gunman. You know, sometimes life is more boring than people want to believe. That's why people believe in conspiracy theories, because it's fun.
Yeah, so, I mean, just for the idiots who haven't picked this up through what you said, you were obviously making a legal argument versus a moral argument, and that was kind of entertaining to see yesterday. So many people thought you were making a moral argument where you weren't, and the disconnect just wasn't registering. I mean, because
Well, because there's emotion. Because
Yeah.
because anti-vaxxers tend to be, and that I know that's a trigger word, but I'm using it descriptively, not pejoratively. But I guess, how do I say this? Like, the facts don't care about their feelings, I guess. Like for example, like I saw some like Phoenix ammunition guy or something online who, like, I was teasing him, saying that he's basically, for Obamacare, because he really essentially was arguing for the same core principles of Obamacare. Doctors must treat, doctors can't refuse to treat. But I was making a legal argument that I think doctors should have the right to refuse service to anyone, just like I think and they didn't like me bringing up the Christian baker and the Nazi cakes and all that stuff either, because it's all that same core value of that same core principle of private property. Get off my lawn, just essentially don't tread on me and I own my life and body, right? It's like, there is the legal argument, but there's the moral argument too, in the sense that, like, when we're talking about rationing doesn't just have to be introduced by the government. In this case, it is being introduced by the government, which is a whole nother ball of wax. But let's say that if the monoclonal antibodies, which is what this is all about, if those were being rationed just in the sense that we only have so many of them, and that's the case, we actually really do only have, in Missouri, I just got done talking to a doctor in this state this morning. He said that, like, we only have so much of these antibodies to go around. So they ration them. But when they ration them, they choose to ration it to give it to the unvaccinated people first. And the doctors do that because they know the vaccine works. The doctors know the vaccine works because the doctors in the hospitals come onto my show and they tell me that the people who are suffering the most in their hospitals are the unvaccinated people. The people that are dying the most in their hospitals are the unvaccinated. Therefore, the doctors made a clinical decision to ration these out to the unvaccinated because they know they'll suffer more, right? But I mean, the anti-vax argument is that, COVID's not as bad as the shot. That, at least I think, if I'm being generous, maybe I'm being generous here, but I'm saying I think the anti-vax position is that the shot is worse than getting COVID. Is that fair, Reed? Give me a third party on that. Would you say that anti-vaxxers would?
I mean, it depends. It's a sliding scale, and I personally am actually not anti-vax. I am just 27 years old and in good shape, and I'm just, I live alone and I'm just not worried about it. But yeah, there is like a certain group of anti-vaxxers who probably would say that. I think it is like, it's not like a hard line group. It kind of slides a bit, but
agreed. I'll give you that. I just want to make sure I'm being fair. Because I do want to change some minds here, right? My intent is not to just provoke, but also to inspire, hopefully, some research and some more deeply considered thought on this subject. But with the doctor and the refusal, the question of the vaccine and whether it's effective, right? The doctors know it's effective, so they give the antibodies to the unvaccinated patients, which ought to tell you something right there. However, ethics is an important part of medicine, and doctors have to make ethical decisions all the time. If let's pretend it's not antibodies, let's pretend it's ventilators, right? Doctors, if there's a limited amount of ventilators, are going to have to make important decisions that are based on the best information that they have about who's going to get a ventilator and who's not going to get a ventilator. And that decision is happening, okay? In this case, it's monoclonal antibodies. So if the doctor, let's say, says, hey, 98% of my staff is vaccinated, I'm vaccinated, we don't want to treat people who are unvaccinated because we have a lot of senior citizens that come in here, so we're only going to treat monoclonal antibodies for patients that come in that are vaccinated, right? If you're unvaccinated, go to someone else who will offer you monoclonal antibodies. But there were libertarians who were in essence arguing that doctor should be required to treat them the same. And I didn't see anybody come out and specifically say the government must make them, but they were basically defaulting to that, which is that, well, since the system is already like this and the government is giving them tax dollars, that means that they have to do what we say. Since the hospitals take taxpayer dollars, they're not free agents anymore. And basically, if that's the case, then we're all cops. because everybody has gotten some kind of tax dollar in some way, some subsidy somehow. So that would make us all, tools of the state if you follow that line of thought. But doctors have to make those ethical decisions all the time. Those ethical decisions are not always as simple as some people would like them to believe. They're not always cut and dry. And just because in the lifeboat scenario that we're discussing of rationing, the Titanic we're talking about here, who gets the lifeboats, right? Who gets the antibodies, right? We're talking about this kind of a life and death scenario on the razor's edge of ethics. I don't get how someone can say to me, they're more moral than me because they choose to save the 3 kids who have made mistakes, who I believe who have made bad decisions, poor decisions in my mind, and then not protect the person who went about what they could to do their best to try and protect themselves, but who no fault of their own has come upon an incident of unfortunate incident upon themselves. 2 people with COVID infections. One had a breakthrough infection because the vaccine just for some reason didn't happen to be effective enough for them. And then another one who decided not to get the vaccine because it was their choice. They could have, but they just didn't do it. And if the doctor wants to say, you know what, I'm going to give it to the person who decided to try and do the best to protect me and my patients or to protect themselves, I'm going to choose that person over the other person. That is somewhat of a moral question, or really an ethical question. But deep down, I think that there's a moral question there somewhere. And you know what? Just because my values on that are the same, just because I want to protect the smart kids and you want to protect the stupid kids in the class, it does make you a better person because there's always going to be more stupid kids. And I love that we're dispersing risk with a military, if I could, extrapolate this example here. But in a sense, caveat emptor, you blow up to 500 pounds, you eat McDonald's, you get COVID, you didn't get vaccinated. Why are you getting top priority over somebody who actually took precautions, tried to protect themselves? I don't understand how on an ethical level you say, treat everybody the same. You didn't treat yourself the same. Why does everyone else need to treat you? Why do people outside of your circle need to treat you better than you treat yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting regardless of what anybody who's watching this, regardless of what your opinion is on all this. It is funny. I remember in 2019, one of my conservative friends showed me a meme, and it was this 500-pound guy sitting at a table eating an entire pizza, and the caption said, "Can you understand why I wouldn't want to pay for your health care?" And it's not the exact same scenario. It's a little bit different. They're not demanding that people pay for their health care or whatever. But it is funny, now seeing progressives say that same exact thing about people who are being treated for COVID, and then seeing conservatives kind of switch over to the opposite side.
Yes. Well, even libertarians read. it was kind of jaw-dropping to see so many self-proclaimed defenders of liberty defending the Obamacare principles, to a degree. Because, again, at the end, they were kind of defaulting to that old, well, if they get government money, that's different. Okay, well, are doctors cops? Do doctors work for the state? No, and we should probably try and protect them from having to become enforcers for the state, right? The vaccine is still voluntary to a degree in the sense that if you don't work for the federal government, or if you're not in the army, or if you're not in a business that is going to fire you for that, right? But again, people, when something negatively impacts them, then they're not a libertarian anymore, right? Everybody's a libertarian until they get punched in the face, and then all of a sudden we all become raging statists. But it's hard to take a kind of broad overarching theme from this because it involves so many different angles. We're talking about medical science, ethics, law, and precedent, and oaths that doctors take, and in a sense we're all just kind of doing the best we can. If you're not a doctor, Fire Pixie just messaged. She says, if this was really about health, why are cigarettes and alcohol still legal? Why are fast food restaurants still open? That's good. It's a good question. And Reed, I think there's an allowable amount of risk that people just think other people should be allowed to take with their bodies. libertarians probably have the broadest definition of that, but if you commit a crime while you're on drugs, you libertarians think the drugs should be legal. But what if drugs were legal and somebody committed a crime because they were on bath salts? Should it be a worse crime because they were on bath salts, or is the crime itself supposed to be judged just as it was? There's a whole school of thought, which I don't agree with, by the way, that's called Libertarian paternalism. And these are people who they call this nudging behavior, or kind of like a sticks and carrots deal. And these are like left libertarians, many of them, and libertarian socialists, some of them, the worst, right? And they kind of like introduce policies that get people to do things in ways that are the least amount of coercion required. So they call it libertarian paternalism, meaning that you can pretty much do most of what you want, but within a certain set of options that's given to us, which is not really true freedom, right? But, left libertarians try and work within the system sometimes and introduce policies. And I listen to left libertarians. I almost never agree with them, but I listen to their ideas and I bat them around my head. And sometimes I even share them publicly. And that can confuse people when most people think like your job is there to serve an audience and to tell the audience what they want to hear and be kind of an entertainer. Yesterday, my fiance asked me, she's like, Austin, she's like, you're not running for office anymore. She's like, you're making all these people angry. She's like, you're losing fans. What are you trying to do? What is this all about? And I just try to explain, well, what I'm really trying to do is right now I'm just on a mission to try and find out what is the truth, to know what the truth is. When I can identify it, I'll share it with others. And so I'm not like organizing campaigns, trying to like bring people together. I'm more now on a sort of more lonely mission of trying to, find out where truth is and bring it to people where I can find it, and be a little bit less, inward facing and more outward facing, because I think that ultimately serves the cause of liberty better, right? When you're out amongst people who mostly maybe don't agree with you, right? It's sobering and humbling to be a libertarian on conservative talk radio, because you have that fine line. You want to do a good job in your career, but you're a stranger in a strange land, and you can only anger the locals for so much until the torches and pitchforks come to your door, right? You want to have good relationship with your community. And I feel like I'm really threading that needle very well here. My life in Jefferson City as a radio talk show host on conservative talk radio, mostly focused at, serving this community's needs to a large degree. I think that in some ways accomplishes more for liberty than my presidential campaign, Senate campaign, or a lot of the other stuff that I did,
Yeah. So I wanted to close on a subject that you've been asked about a lot, but I'm going to ask it from a different angle. I want to talk about nukes a little bit. So I think everyone's.
You are fascinated. You're exactly the type of person that when I bring up the nukes discussion that I think of, because I know that there are a lot of people who think really deeply about this stuff like I do and nerd out on it. So I'm really glad that I sparked that discussion, because it's got people like you thinking.
Yeah, so I want to ask it from a little bit different angle than, because everyone I think has heard, why you think they were justified. And I actually disagree with you on that point. But
sure.
What I will admit, and I was convinced of this through Schellenberger, who wrote Apocalypse Never. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's a huge nuclear power advocate. And he made the point in a podcast I was listening to that nuclear weapons have brought us the closest thing to world peace that we'll ever have. And at first that sounds crazy, but then when you start thinking about it, it's like, well, every time another superpower gets nukes, there are no longer any major wars between that superpower and another superpower. So, Russia has them now. North Korea has them. If Iran ever had them, we'd probably stop fucking with them. If Iraq had actually had nukes, we probably wouldn't have invaded them. And then you start realizing that mutual assured destruction might actually be one of the best things that has ever been given to this world. So,
well, maybe not mutually assured destruction, but I'll tell you this. deterrence. I think what you're looking for is the word deterrent,
Sure.
right? So
The fear of mutual assured
right. But my philosophy is that it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in war. Okay, and like I believe in peace at nearly any cost, not all, but nearly any. I talk about this a lot. I used to write podcasts about this a lot. Why libertarians need to learn how to fight. And one of the problems I think is so often is that the liberty movement is toothless, right? And in that, porcupines have quills for a reason. Don't tread on me should mean something, right? What you're seeing in Australia right now with those Aussies, elbow checking the popo, that's the quill of the porcupine. But it's not just the actual fighting, physical fighting. Like you can see here, I'm in my dojo. Like traditional Japanese martial arts is something that I train for, but it's not just the physical aspect; it's the spiritual and sort of the philosophical view of martial arts that I really appreciate as well. And karate is for defense only, and there's no first strike in karate. Is like one of the common things that they say. But when it comes to the nuclear weapon and the deterrent, the fact that people know that you have one is enough. In one of my books, so from one of the karate masters, I think it was, I was reading Gichin Funakoshi's book. He was talking about how people in Japan or in Okinawa, do you know what a makiwara is? A makiwara is like a punching board, and it's got rice straw wrapped around it. And karateka in Japan would train on the makiwara. And so what people found out was that people who had makiwaras outside their house, they were robbed much fewer times. So what people started doing was, even if they didn't practice karate, they used to put makiwara outside their house because it would scare off the thieves, right? It was like a scarecrow device in some ways. And I think that in some ways, nuclear weapons do perform that function now. They had to be used to be seen and understood and known, and it took two of them to convince the Emperor of Japan that there was no use to continue. But yeah, I agree with the sentiment that your friend said there. As that author said there, but as a deterrent, it's important that people know that you can back up what you mean. And the idea is that I train karate and I train in firearms so that I hopefully never ever have to use it. I don't ever want to have to use it. I never want to have to be in that situation. I am anti-war until the day that the war comes to my door. And at that time, I will be a warrior in a garden, not a gardener in war. I'm fine with pacifists. If you want to be a Quaker, that should be your religious freedom, and see as you do fit. If you don't wish to be desire to be, part of the nation state, I don't believe in a draft or anything like that. It should be an all-volunteer military. But libertarianism needs teeth. Libertarianism needs men on the wall protecting us. So liberty must be defended, because if you don't defend liberty with teeth, then the government absolutely will take it, because Australia is the prime example. They gave away their teeth, they're toothless, and now they're being overrun. So for me, the nuclear weapons as a deterrent are important to ensure that people do not even try and invade the mainland United States,
Yeah. Well, thank you for coming on, Austin. I'm glad we worked it out last time. Our scheduling, that was my fault. I fucked it up.
I wanted to do it, Reed, because I really enjoy your commentary. And here's something that you can clip if you want to play it, post it on Twitter. Reed Coverdale is awesome. He's got great hot takes. Some of them are crap, but no. Definitely check out Reed Coverdale's Twitter account, follow him, and I highly recommend his commentary. And I think he might even have a better mustache.
Yeah, well, you've kind of graduated to the goatee. You've moved beyond just the.
You intimidated me with your perfect '70s porn stash. Honestly, I was like, I can't even compete, so I just went for the beer brow.
Where can people keep up with you? Where can people pay attention to what you're doing?
Everybody knows me as AP for Liberty on social media, but if you're not listening to my radio program, you really need to, because I do cover all the issues of the day that you were going to listen to anyway on some other podcast, but it wasn't going to be as much fun. There wasn't going to be as much cool music getting played, and there wasn't going to be such a fun community like there is on our live streams. So if you follow me over on Facebook, you can follow the Facebook KWOS Morning Show live stream. That's fun. If you don't do Facebook, just see me online at AP for Liberty.
All right. Well, thank you, Austin. I'd like to do this again sometime. I appreciate your independent thought. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you, sir.